Captain Marcus Rodriguez had been flying F-15s for 8 years when he noticed something that would change everything. During a routine training exercise over the Nevada desert, his radar operator, Technical Sergeant Jake Mitchell, transmitted a sequence of codes that made Marcus's blood run cold. It wasn't the standard military communication protocol they'd drilled 1,000 times. It was something else entirely. A personal code his deceased father had taught him as a child, one that only two people in the world had ever known. Marcus's father, Colonel David Rodriguez, had been a legendary pilot himself, killed in action during a classified mission in Afghanistan when Marcus was just 16. Before deploying, his father had shared a secret communication system with him, a series of numerical sequences disguised as routine operational codes that could convey personal messages. It was their private language, born from a father's love and a son's admiration for military precision. His father had said it was something special between them, something that would connect them even when separated by duty and distance. The code Jake had just transmitted spelled out "Help me" in their secret system. Marcus felt his hands shake on the controls as he processed what this meant. Jake Mitchell was 24 years old, fresh from technical school, and had never met Marcus's father. There was absolutely no way he could know this code unless someone had taught it to him, someone who had no right to know it existed. Marcus's mind raced through the possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. During the post-flight briefing, Marcus couldn't concentrate on the standard debriefing protocols. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, was discussing flight patterns and communication efficiency, but Marcus was studying Jake's face, searching for any sign of recognition or fear. Jake appeared nervous, more so than usual for a relatively new airman. His eyes kept darting toward the door, and he fidgeted with his pen throughout the entire session. After the briefing, Marcus approached Jake privately in the equipment bay. The young sergeant was checking radio equipment, his movements quick and anxious. When Marcus asked about the code sequence, Jake's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he stammered something about following standard protocols. But Marcus had been in the military long enough to recognize when someone was lying, and Jake's explanation didn't match the confidence he'd shown during the flight. That evening, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his father's words the last time they'd spoken. Sometimes the most important messages come through the most unexpected channels, son. Always be ready to listen. His father had been cryptic about many things related to his work, but Marcus had always assumed it was standard military secrecy. Now he wondered if there had been something more, something that had followed his father to his grave and was now reaching out through Jake Mitchell. The next morning, Marcus decided to investigate further. He pulled Jake's service record and discovered something that made his stomach drop. Jake had been reassigned to Marcus's unit just 3 months ago, transferred from a classified communications unit at Nellis Air Force Base. The transfer had been expedited, and the paperwork showed minimal justification for the move. More disturbing was Jake's previous assignment. He had been working in the same communications division that had handled his father's final mission 8 years ago. Marcus spent his lunch break in the base library, researching everything he could about his father's last assignment. Most of the information was classified, but he found enough declassified reports to piece together a troubling picture. His father had been investigating irregularities in mission communications, specifically instances where classified information was being leaked to unauthorized personnel. The official report stated that Colonel Rodriguez had died during a routine reconnaissance mission, but Marcus had always suspected there was more to the story. When Marcus returned to the flight line that afternoon, he found Jake waiting by his aircraft. The young sergeant looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. His usually precise uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Jake approached Marcus with obvious reluctance, glancing around nervously before speaking in a low voice that was barely audible over the sound of nearby aircraft engines. "Captain Rodriguez," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something about your father, about what really happened to him, but not here. Too many people are watching, and I don't know who I can trust anymore. Meet me at the old hangar on the south side of the base tonight at midnight. Come alone and don't tell anyone about this conversation." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as Jake walked away quickly, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to make himself invisible. The young sergeant's words echoed in Marcus's mind for the rest of the day. What did Jake know about his father's death? And why was he using their secret code to communicate? Marcus realized that his routine training exercise had uncovered something much larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. That night, Marcus made his way to the abandoned hangar, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The old building had been used for storage since before Marcus's assignment to the base, and it was far enough from the main facilities to provide privacy. As he approached the rusted door, he could see a dim light flickering inside. Jake was already there, packing nervously in the shadows. "Captain, thank God you came," Jake said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I've been carrying this secret for months, and I didn't know how to tell you without putting both of us in danger. Your father didn't die in a routine mission. He was murdered because he discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep buried." Jake pulled out a weathered folder from his jacket, his hands shaking as he opened it. "Before I was transferred to your unit, I worked in classified communications. Part of my job was to archive old mission reports, and I found these files that were supposed to have been destroyed years ago. They contain communications between your father and his superiors during his last assignment." He had discovered that someone in the command structure was selling classified flight patterns and mission details to foreign agents. Marcus stared at the documents Jake was showing him, his father's handwriting clearly visible in the margins. The reports detailed a systematic investigation into communication breaches, with his father documenting instances where sensitive information had been leaked before missions. The final report, dated just 2 days before his father's death, contained a list of suspects within the base command structure, including several high-ranking officers who were still active in the military. Your father was going to expose this network, Jake continued, but someone found out about his investigation. The mission he died on was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance flight, but someone altered the flight plan and sent him directly into enemy territory. The official report blamed equipment failure, but these documents show that his aircraft was sabotaged. Marcus felt anger building in his chest as he read through the files. His father had been a hero, not just for his service to the country, but for his willingness to stand up against corruption within his own ranks. The fact that his murder had been covered up for 8 years made Marcus's hands clench into fists. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked Jake. "And how do you know about our communication code?" Jake's expression grew even more serious. "Because they're planning to do it again. The same network that killed your father is still operating, and they've identified you as a potential threat. They know you've been asking questions about your father's death, and they're planning to eliminate you during next week's training exercise. They transferred me to your unit to monitor your communications and report back to them." The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Marcus realized that his assignment to this particular unit, his pairing with Jake as a radar operator, and even some of the recent training exercises had all been orchestrated by the same people who had killed his father. "How do you know about our code?" Marcus asked again, his voice hardening. "Your father taught it to me," Jake said quietly. "Not directly, but he left instructions in his final report. He knew he was in danger, and he wanted to ensure that if something happened to him, someone would be able to communicate with you using a method that only you would recognize. He hid the code sequence in his mission reports, disguised as routine operational data. When I discovered his files, I realized what he had done." Marcus felt his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. His father had been thinking about him even in his final days, creating a way to reach out from beyond the grave to protect his son. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. "Why are you risking your life to tell me this?" Jake looked directly at Marcus, his young face showing a maturity that hadn't been there before. "Because your father was a good man who died trying to do the right thing, and because I've been ordered to help them kill you next week. I can't live with that on my conscience. But we need to be smart about this. These people have connections throughout the military command structure, and they won't hesitate to eliminate both of us if they discover what we know. Marcus spent the next several days carefully planning their next move. He couldn't trust anyone within his immediate command structure, but he had contacts in other branches of the military who might be able to help. His father's investigation had been thorough, but incomplete. Marcus realized that he would need to finish what his father had started, not just to get justice for his death, but to prevent other good soldiers from being murdered by the same corrupt network. Jake provided Marcus with additional information about the planned sabotage. The upcoming training exercise would involve multiple aircraft, making it easier to disguise another accident. The sabotage would be subtle, a small alteration to the flight control system that would cause a malfunction during high-stress maneuvers. Marcus's aircraft would crash, and the investigation would conclude that pilot error or mechanical failure was responsible. Working together, Marcus and Jake developed a plan to expose the conspiracy. They would use the upcoming training exercise as an opportunity to gather evidence, with Jake secretly recording communications and Marcus documenting any suspicious activities. It was dangerous, but they both knew it was the only way to honor Colonel Rodriguez's memory and prevent future murders. The night before the training exercise, Marcus called his sister Elena, who lived in Colorado with her husband and 2 young children. He couldn't tell her about the danger he was facing, but he wanted to hear her voice one more time. Elena had always been close to their father, and she deserved to know the truth about his death. Marcus promised himself that if he survived the next day, he would share everything with her. As Marcus prepared for what might be his final flight, he thought about his father's words. Sometimes the most important messages come through the most unexpected channels. Jake Mitchell had been that unexpected channel, a young airman who had chosen to do the right thing despite the personal risk. Marcus realized that his father's legacy wasn't just about military service. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it meant facing overwhelming odds. The morning of the training exercise dawned clear and bright, with perfect conditions for flying. Marcus and Jake went through their pre-flight checks with extra care, knowing that their lives depended on identifying any sabotage before they left the ground. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus knew that the real danger would come once they were airborne and vulnerable. During the flight, Marcus paid close attention to every communication from ground control and other aircraft. Jake was secretly recording everything, using equipment he had modified to capture transmissions on frequencies that weren't normally monitored. As the exercise progressed, Marcus began to notice subtle irregularities in the flight patterns being assigned to his aircraft. They were being directed toward areas that would make rescue difficult if something went wrong. When the sabotage finally occurred, it was exactly as Jake had predicted. Marcus felt his flight controls become sluggish during a high-speed maneuver, and warning lights began flashing on his instrument panel. But because they had anticipated this, Marcus was able to maintain control of the aircraft and execute an emergency landing at a nearby airfield. The people who had killed his father had failed in their attempt to murder his son. The evidence that Marcus and Jake had gathered was overwhelming. The recorded communications showed clear coordination between ground control and the aircraft that had been monitoring Marcus's flight. The flight data recorder revealed that the control system malfunction had been caused by a device that could only have been installed by someone with intimate knowledge of F-15 systems. Most damning of all, Jake had recorded conversations between the conspirators discussing the planned accident. Marcus contacted his father's former colleague, Brigadier General Robert Hayes, who was now serving at the Pentagon. General Hayes had been one of the few people Colonel Rodriguez had trusted completely, and Marcus knew he would listen to the evidence with an open mind. The general was shocked by what Marcus revealed, but he immediately understood the implications. The conspiracy reached much higher in the command structure than even Colonel Rodriguez had realized. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Within weeks, 12 high-ranking officers were arrested and charged with treason, murder, and conspiracy. The network that had operated for over a decade was finally dismantled, and the families of other soldiers who had died in suspicious circumstances were finally able to learn the truth about their loved ones' deaths. Jake Mitchell was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, and he was reassigned to a new unit where his skills could be put to better use. Marcus was promoted and given a new assignment that would allow him to continue his father's work in a different capacity. The two men remained close friends, bonded by their shared experience and their commitment to honor Colonel Rodriguez's memory. During the court proceedings, Marcus learned the full extent of his father's investigation. Colonel Rodriguez had identified over 30 instances where classified information had been leaked to foreign agents, resulting in the deaths of dozens of American soldiers and the compromise of numerous military operations. His father had been a hero in every sense of the word, and his sacrifice had ultimately led to the exposure of one of the most damaging spy networks in modern military history. Marcus visited his father's grave on the anniversary of his death, bringing with him a copy of the final report that had exonerated Colonel Rodriguez and recognized his heroic service. He placed the document on the headstone and spoke to his father about everything that had happened. "Your message came through, Dad," he said quietly. "Jake was the unexpected channel you talked about, and together we finished what you started." As Marcus stood in the cemetery, he reflected on the lessons his father had taught him about duty, honor, and courage. Colonel Rodriguez had paid the ultimate price for his commitment to doing what was right, but his legacy lived on through his son, and through the young airmen who had chosen to risk everything to expose the truth. The secret code that had connected father and son had ultimately become the key to bringing justice to those who had betrayed their country and their fellow soldiers. Years later, Marcus would often tell the story of how his father's love and foresight had reached across the grave to protect him and expose a deadly conspiracy. The bond between father and son had transcended death, proving that some connections are too strong to be broken by time or circumstance. Jake Mitchell had been the messenger, but Colonel David Rodriguez had been the architect of his own son's salvation and his killer's downfall. The F-15 training exercise that was supposed to end Marcus's life had instead become the beginning of a new chapter in his military career. He went on to serve with distinction for many more years, always remembering his father's words about listening for important messages through unexpected channels. The code that had saved his life became a symbol of the unbreakable bond between a father and son, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is the courage to stand up and fight for what is right. In the end, Marcus realized that his father's greatest gift hadn't been the secret code or the hidden investigation files. It had been the example of a man who was willing to sacrifice everything to protect his fellow soldiers and his country. That example had inspired Jake Mitchell to risk his own life to do the right thing, and it continued to guide Marcus throughout his career. The code that had connected them was just the beginning of a legacy that would influence countless other soldiers to choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and honor over personal gain. The story of the F-15 pilots and the secret code spread throughout the military community, becoming a legend that inspired other service members to remain vigilant against corruption and to always be ready to stand up for their fellow soldiers. Marcus and Jake's courage had not only brought justice for Colonel Rodriguez, but had also strengthened the bonds of trust and honor that held the military together. Their actions proved that no conspiracy is too powerful to overcome when good people are willing to work together and fight for what is right. Marcus never forgot the moment when he first heard his father's secret code transmitted through Jake's radio. It had been a message of love reaching across the years, a father's final gift to his son, and a call to action that had ultimately brought justice to those who had betrayed their oath to protect and serve. The code had been their private language, but its message of courage and honor belonged to everyone who wore the uniform and swore to defend their country against all enemies, both foreign and domestic.